Good. Thanks very much to the Zanog PC for allowing me to come here and speak to you. I'm Jim Cowie. I got my start in high-performance computing in like the 1990s. And after that, I had a company that only a few people remember at this point. It was called Renesas. And we did internet measurement all over the world. And I spoke at a lot of NOGs. I'm not a network operator, but I have moved among you for decades. I think we first got real visibility in 2011. In 2011, the Arab Spring hit, and Egypt disconnected itself from the internet. And so suddenly, having insight into BGP routing and trace routes and where things were failing became sort of New York Times level interest. And that was interesting, because I think it was the first time that a global general audience clued into the fact that the internet was the kind of infrastructure that you could break and you could take down. And so, thank you. So it was at that moment that we realized that there's history being made. And so here we are many years later. I'm now at the Berkman Klein Center for Internet and Society, and also, importantly, at the Library Innovation Lab at the library in the law school at Harvard, where we think about the application of new technologies to how information is constructed and conveyed to the next generation. What I'm going to talk about today is the way that the work that you do now ultimately turns into somebody else's history in 100 years. We've been at this for about 25 years, depending on how you draw the boundaries. And there are a lot of different lenses, as I have learned this year among academics, for how you might want to construct the concept of internet history. So one, of course, is you can go through the old listservs, and you can still talk to many of the original people, as I have, to hear the stories and ask them questions about the old ARPANET. You can go back through the network science of it. There are specifically people who study not like our networks, but human networks, like who talked to who exchanged email with who on what email archive. That's really interesting to build up a picture of the kinds of people that were working on the internet for the last 25 years or so. There are cultural anthropologists who have gone to IETF meetings and studied how they reach consensus and how they behave or misbehave in groups, kind of like doing an ethnography on a governance group. There are a lot of studies that look at this through sort of colonial lenses, as the internet as power projection by the US or by Europe. And there are a lot of very specific looks that people have taken, including Packet Clearinghouse, which has a fantastic look at the history of IXPs, right? Digging back through the email archives to figure out exactly who started what, when, where. For my part, I'm going to stick to the parts that I kind of understand. And for me, because of my history at Renesas, that had to do with gathering the records of internet measurement. So the preservation of the recorded data history. So some of you, I hope, have RIPE Atlas probes installed, and you're using them to perform internet performance measurements. Maybe some of you have done BGP peerings with RIPE RIS and are uploading your BGP routes as they happen. And these are the sorts of data sets that we have, in some cases going back to the late 1990s. And that's the important stuff. This is what we need to preserve. As you'll see, information doesn't want to stay information. It wants to evaporate. Information is subject to destruction. When I talk to people about this project, they always say, okay, I get it. It's like the Great Library of Alexandria. I thought this was a funny example, but yesterday I met with librarians from the Cape Town, University of Cape Town Special Collections, who had lost a lot of material in fires 4 years ago this month. So fire is the enemy of libraries. We think of the Great Library of Alexandria as having just been burned. But in fact, it wasn't really, the burning is the part that we remember because it was interesting. It was built around 300 BC by Ptolemy I, or maybe his son. And it grew to hundreds of thousands of volumes in the library. This would have been something that took hundreds of people. It would have filled warehouses. So when Caesar set fire to his ships in the harbor during the siege against Ptolemy the 14th, I guess, in 48 BC, some of those caught fire. And that's the part that comes down to us as history. But in fact, that library had been seeing a rise and then a decline for centuries. And it doesn't finally kind of disappear from historical record until maybe 400 AD. And the interesting thing there is that it's tied to economics, right? History requires that you put money into it. You have to put labor into it to maintain it. In the case of Alexandria, they went through a period of economic decline. What they produced for the Roman Empire became relatively less valuable, and it just kind of faded away. This is kind of the lesson. Today it's been refounded on the same site, or at least what we think might be the same site. And the neat thing is that now it has massive digital collections. So there are hundreds of thousands of books that you can read for free online as a new form of digital preservation. I tried to go to the website yesterday, but it was down. But, you know. So the origin story here for me is back to the Renesas story. So we had a good company, part of a good organization, for about 14 years. Renesas was sold to another company who I've kind of obscured here. If you know all the AS numbers, you'll know who it is. They were in turn sold to another AS number. And then all the data we had collected for almost 15 years vanished. Because data that is commercial property is subject to the fate of commercial property. Sometimes it gets thrown out, or sometimes you just don't get to see it again. So with that in mind, I started up this project to basically go back through. It's the Internet History Initiative, and we're looking to take copies of all of the primary data sets of Internet measurement history at several different levels and try to put them together in a coherent picture, with the audience ultimately being historians 100 years from now, when everybody in this room is gone. What we really want to do here, I think, is, well, first of all, we have to catalog everything, as a librarian would do. There's a wonderful sort of acronym, LOCKS, in librarian culture, which is that lots of copies keep stuff safe. So today, these things are replicated, but perhaps not to the degree that you would imagine. What we'd like to do is to take a lot of copies of all of these data sets and then use them to document the rapid expansion phase. That's the period in the internet from about 1998 to roughly now, where the internet grows from being kind of an American curiosity to being something truly global that reaches every country. And what's interesting here is that there are academics who think of all the UN development goals. They want to study conflict, they want to study elections and politics, they want to study development economics, of course, education, public health. All of these academic subjects are informed by what happened to the internet as you built it over the last 25 years. And so piecing together the evidence for that relationship is going to take time. And we may not be able to do it now, but eventually historians will look back and put this together. The final goal of the project, when I talk to librarians, they always remind me this should have been the first priority of the project, is how to pay for it. So to map out some kind of an endowment or a sustaining framework that will allow these digital collections to be around in 100 years, which is harder than you think. So if you think about what regional NOGs like this one built over the years, it's really quite extraordinary. I've talked at a lot of NOG groups around the world. What's interesting is that by contributing BGP routing data, both updates and table snapshots, to RIPE-RIS, to Oregon route views. There's a lot of packet clearinghouse data. We see the evolving interconnection among every autonomous system, second by second, over decades. That's extraordinary, right? You can go back literally in these records and find the appearance of any autonomous system, the very first time they lit something up. You can find out every time they changed transit. If you have enough peering sessions, you can tell fluctuations in their peering, et cetera. And that's how people are going to tell the story of growth and diversification of especially the local regional internets. And then on top of routing, I start with routing because it's my first love. There's lots of active measurement. So ping and trace route and all of these good things and DNS records and everything else. All of it comes together to paint the picture for future historians of what happened here over these years. So like this is the very simplest perspective on what they will see. They will look in and they'll see the BGP routing table. On the left, it's V4 plus V6. And you can see it starts off basically South African. But very rapidly, over 25 years, it grows up until every country on the continent is represented. And the top green stripe there is the long tail of everybody else. It's really substantial. And you can zoom in and see that, yes, IPv6 took off starting in about 2004. At least that's when the first prefixes hit the routing table at RIPE-RIS, and has grown up since. And so they'll look at the growth, but they'll also want to look at the interconnection. And there's a lot, they'll want to look at a lot of different dimensions of how this all came together. That's why beyond routing and beyond active measurement, we're also talking about ping and trace. And so I've kind of mapped it out here layer by layer. So at the base of it, we need to know names and numbers. We need to know who assigned ASNs. We need to know prefix allocations. We need to know roughly where things were. If we have geo-IP references or old copies of MaxMind or whatever we have that we can get through time, we'll want to know. Because, of course, IP prefix geolocation changes over time. And that is a phenomenon that accelerates during the period when IPv4 becomes a commercial resource, and a prefix that starts off in Romania ends up in the next day in Saudi Arabia. So we have to piece this record together. RIPE Atlas Measurement Lab, KIDA ARC, and a project that I'll describe in a moment at SLAC called Pinger, which was actually doing just pings from different sites to different sites starting in 1997 to basically last year. We need DNS information on top of that, historical information about the root zones, a lot of data at DNS OARC that needs to be preserved. And then finally, weird sources of things. Like every time the Internet Archive mirrors a web page, their scraper actually records the IP address of the server that served it to them, which is almost like accidental in the system. But it's a really nice resource. Otherwise, we would not have a long, continuous record of what content was hosted where, regardless of provider. So we'll put this all together. Ultimately, my hope is that people, I won't name them, but companies that do flow data commercially for a living will ultimately be able to share that data as well. It may be sensitive. Perhaps because we're looking to build a library-style archive, we can do this as kind of a dark archive where commercially sensitive information can be locked up and unlocked at some point down the road. After all, the primary customer here is not us. It's like our grandchildren. So just as an example of an interesting data set, and part of why I go around and talk about this project is I talk about it, and then somebody will say, oh, I know of something you might want to save. This actually happened to me. Somebody came to me and said, oh, I used to work with Les Cottrell at SLAC. Do you have the Pinger data? And Pinger was this project at the Stanford Linear Accelerator Center where the physicists had done measurements of the old internet to make sure it was fit for purpose for transporting physics data around the planet. And they continuously measured, and this data piled up over time. They were very good at measuring to places like South Africa, the Middle East, other places that were not traditionally measured to. And then the project shut down, as happens to all projects, as happens to all companies. Les Cottrell retired, and I went to find his data, and I found out that the servers were down. And I asked what had happened here. And they said, well, the servers are down, and we hadn't thought about it. So I got them to turn the servers back on, and we copied this data, all of this data. It's like a terabyte for all of this history. And so now we've preserved that. But if it hadn't been for a lucky hallway conversation, basically at a nog like this, those machines might have just gone out to recycling. And we would not have this wonderful continuous record. Les did some pioneering presentations at workshops like this, where he talked about the digital divide and the emergence of African internet. They dug into this data, which the fundamental data is quite primitive. It's just like packet loss and latency on pings over time, over time, over time. But he was able to piece together all of this intelligence about fiber cuts and new cables and old cables. And so we have this data. It's been rescued. Now it awaits curation. We have to transcribe it, put it into formats that we can all use now to make it easy. Because frankly, a historian at a university is never going to go back into that data archive and use the pinger data. So the challenge here is fundamentally kind of twofold. On one level, you have to make a physical collection for preservation. This is just so you don't lose anything. And then on top of that, you need almost a second collection, which is the working collection, which is where researchers will come and help each other build the tools to make sure that we understand what that data meant over time, why it matters. Okay, so if you think about the first collection, this is the one that we would probably, those in this room would have a fun time building. This is archival. There's a really neat blog that you can Google for. It's called Century Scale Storage. It was published earlier this year by Maxwell Neely Cohen at the Library Innovation Lab. And he talks about what it means to store digital media for 100 years. And you very quickly realize that there's basically nothing you can inscribe your data on that will still reliably be readable in 100 years. So it becomes a process, right? So we will take in these primary data sets, we'll do minimal curation, we'll make sure that it's clear where they came from and how we came to be in possession of them. We'll checksum them so that they can't be later modified without people realizing that the chain has been broken. And then we'll plan to recopy this onto new media, probably every 10 years or so, just to make sure that we can still read our backups. The second collection is perhaps more interesting. This is the one where we have to build the tools for people who are outside our community to make use of our history. So think of it as building a huge data lake. This one we're going to tear down. We're going to build it up, maybe tear it down every year as the tools of data science evolve so that we can meet the challenges of the day. Hopefully we'll be able to bring in people to study this data, and they will leave behind a trail of open source tools that will show people how to fuse and interpret what's in the raw data. Ultimately, and I have to be careful here because I don't want to take a shot, but it may be possible to do creative things like use LLMs as interfaces, right? I think there's some potential to use LLMs intelligently as user interface go-betweens. There are many, many more people who can ask questions than can code intelligent queries against databases. And so I think there's interesting things to be examined there. And, okay, well, now I really have to take a shot if that's the rule. I would have taken this out if I knew that in advance. Just as a quick sidebar, because my time is kind of up, this is what I think is going to happen. This is another reason why we want to study internet history. Every technical infrastructure that gets built is built on the bones of the one that came before it, right? So our AI infrastructure right now is built and clustered and paid for and controlled by the people who have large cloud computing infrastructure, who are the same people who have large data center infrastructure, who are the same people who have the best transcontinental internet connectivity, and so on. And so the fact that this is going to require control as a new infrastructure on top of the old means that we have to think carefully about how we want this to come out. And if it's possible, perhaps learn the lessons for how we successfully dealt with internet governance. It's possible that this could come out as some sort of a multi-stakeholder process among civil society groups, which would be cool. It's probably more likely that AI regulation will come out as a multilateral process among governments, or it will come out as some sort of a cabal among a few organizations that own the big frontier models and give the rest of us access to them. I just hold this up as something that will probably affect this region rather strongly. It's up to us, I think, to figure out how AI is going to be made available to everybody. And it would be a shame if we reached an end goal where our economies, our universities, our health systems were dependent on AI assistance that was all physically hosted in San Francisco. This would be a problem. It's a struggle to get people to think about the physicality of infrastructure in general. And in particular, it's a struggle to get people to think about the physicality and the geography of the internet. So that's what this project ultimately, I think, is to be about. So quickly, very quickly, what we want to do, ultimately, what can we do once we have our preservation archive and our research collection? We can throw the door open, right? We can bring in non-experts, people from beyond our community to do collaborations. Maybe it's artists, maybe it's storytellers. Maybe students come in and build augmented reality walkthroughs of what the internet looked like in a country as it came to be. Maybe we can go back and use LLMs to introduce these concepts and help people explore these data sets without being a coder. Because a lot of this, I will argue, depends on turning your work, which is making the internet happen, into something that the public can understand and appreciate. Infrastructure is invisible, and that's a big problem. Because for people to really understand what it matters when your infrastructure breaks or is limited or is controlled from someplace else, they have to understand who built it and who's maintaining it. And that's all part of this history. So I can't resist my final thought is from Gilbert Simondon, a great philosopher of technology, sort of the patron saint of this kind of history. And he looked at technology in isolation and said when technology happens, but it's not integrated into the human experience, it's just technology, it's not progress. He looked at, famously, oil infrastructure in Algeria, passing right by people who were freezing to death or starving. And he said, how is this? This isn't progress. So he said, transforming all the conditions of human life, augmenting the exchange of causality between what man produces and what he is, true technical progress might be considered as implying human progress if it has a network structure whose mesh is human reality. 1959, I think he was anticipating us being here today. Anyway, thanks very much. I can take questions if this material supports questions at all. Oh, all right. Oh, I have one.
Hi, I'm Nathan from Observe Technologies. In these sorts of archival projects, with the exponential growth required by products like LLMs, do you find that the massive increase in data that you are, or that is being produced and you are seeing, is more a help or a hindrance?
Yeah, it's true that data, the volumes of this data do increase sort of exponentially. This would be particularly true if everybody shared what they have. A lot of the largest and most complete data of this kind is locked up inside a few companies. And we are unlikely to ever see that, although I would like to, A, I would like them to help with this, and B, I'd like to see that data again someday. So it's a challenge. Fortunately, just looking at the internet layer, it's pretty much converged on what it's going to look like, I think. The fact that it has flattened so much, the fact that the internet backbone is no longer really used for transit as much as it was before. Now it's like 6 companies at the edge everywhere. Yeah. At least that's why I kind of almost put an end date on this period of expansion. I think people are going to want to understand very carefully exactly how this came to be everywhere between 1998 and 2024 or 5. And beyond this point, I'm not sure what we do.
Thank you.
Sure.
Hi there, Ed from ZNOG. Sorry. Just one question to perhaps make it simple for people, but is there anything that our community can do to support you, other than obviously finances, which you mentioned at the start, but are there other ways other than finances that the community could support you in your project?
No, good question. I always tell people, if you have old flash drives, in your closet that have the odd terabyte of measurement data from a particular point in time, or spread the word. If your friends, if anybody's heard of a source of data that I have not discovered, every bit of it is like mining for gold, right? Because every time you take a measurement across the live internet at a moment, you can never revisit that moment again. You may be the only person that has a trace route from A to B at a particular moment in time. So I think keep your ears open for people who might have alternative data sources or projects which are being shut down or companies that have recently decided to go quiet. Maybe they have data on the shelf. It can be a nice final moment to make sure that your affairs are in order and the measurements you collected will be there. Cool. All right. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Jim. So now we move on to the first panel of the conference. If I could invite the panelists up on stage, please. Don, Sarah, and Yazid. Thank you.